The Casey Review was billed as a report on boosting opportunity and integration in our most isolated and deprived communities. Its author, Dame Louise Casey, says she found segregation and social exclusion at worrying levels, and nowhere more so than in some of the Yorkshire towns and cities she visited for her research. Now, response has been polarised. Len Tingle has been speaking to some of those with strong views.
The pace of the population change in some areas of the country in particular, partly because of immigration, partly because of other issues, has just been too much.
Dame Louise Casey researched and wrote this report, former investigator of grooming in Rotherham, highlights community isolation and lack of English.
Some schools that were less than 5% non-UK nationals are now 95% non-UK nationals. You've got areas of the country, for example, in places like Bradford, Birmingham and Burnley, where now we have wards in local authority areas that are 75%, 95% either Muslim only or Pakistani heritage or Bangladeshi heritage. Now, that type of high concentration in schools and in residential areas has consequences, really.
I have there's some really good recommendations and we need to be implementing them, and the government needs to take a lead on this, and communities need to take a lead on lots of the work. But equally, there's quite a bit missing. I think we've really missed some opportunities in this report.
Naz Shah, Bradford-born MP. For her, not enough emphasis on the role of economic deprivation and spending cuts.
I personally feel that this report actually deflects from the real issues, and that is a government's failure, systematic failure over the last decade on immigration, on social cohesion and issues which impact, and that the austerity measures that are being put in place are only driving these divides even bigger, and that's what's happening here.
We're mixing and we're getting to know the communities, and it's not just white children, it's people of other races and religions.
Sheena Ali, teacher at 85% Asian Bradford Junior School. Children need to meet and play together.
It's making sure that children are understanding that there are a wider aspect of religions and races out there, and colours of people, you know, looking at our similarities, looking at understanding our similarities and the differences and respecting everybody.
When people migrate to another country, they often do cluster together. British expats go to Spain, they live in communities in Spain.
Steve Winston, UKIP parliamentary candidate. Better spoken English, less multiculturalism, more integration into English life.
Interestingly, in Spain, all of the documentation is in Spanish. Over here in the UK, we spend £59,000–60,000 per day, the NHS, for translation services in the NHS alone. And things like that, if we encourage more use of the language, make all of our documentation in English, make it a prerequisite of benefit claiming, we can actually make integration happen rather than just talking about it and complaining about it. We need to have a possible positive solution for this, and that's one of them.
We think this report unfairly stigmatises black ethnic minorities in relation to their failure to integrate.
Nadeem Matuja runs Minority Rights Pressure Group. Confusion over how much white community helps create cultural isolation.
What this report fails to do is acknowledge that this is a joint responsibility between both white communities and black ethnic minority communities. But let me also make this other point. This report does not actually acknowledge that white communities do actually live in white enclaves. There's a number of white communities who actually send their children to white predominant schools. And in addition to that, there's also the issue of white flight, where white communities are actually abandoning inner city black ethnic minority areas.
Well, we're also joined now by Saima Aslam, who's the MD and Artistic Director of the Bradford Literature Festival, who has strong views on this subject. Welcome to the Sunday Politics.
Thank you.
Why are we still talking about a lack of integration in cities like Bradford?
I think it's an easy scapegoat. In the current political climate and in the current global climate, we're all looking for reasons why there have been certain failures. I think post-Brexit, post-Trump, possibly post-capitalism, we need reasons as to why certain things aren't happening. And cities like Bradford, cities like Birmingham, cities like Leicester, Luton, where there have been high levels of immigration, actually provide those scapegoats. And what we don't look at is that actually these are manufacturing towns where people moved in because they were required for labour, and now we are in a situation where those people are not required for those jobs. And actually what we need to be looking at is that actually if we strip away the ethnicity, this is actually about working class communities and actually about the skills that they require to actually be economically engaged and socially mobile.
Julian Stelly, Louise Casey's report talks about the need to promote Britishness. How do you promote Britishness? What is Britishness?
Well, you've got to look at it through British values, haven't you? Rule of law would be classed as one. I mean, it's about communities as well, actually bringing communities together.
Chicken tikka masala might be another.
I mean, there's loads of ways you could describe it. But I thought what was actually really interesting in the Casey review was it said it had to do it area by area. And I think that's something we do need to look at. You know, it's because each community will have different views and different thoughts on the Casey review. It's right that the government pauses now at this point and listens to what other communities have to say about it and feeds back in. They say they're going to come back out in April 2017 with their view on the findings, and I think it's right. I mean, if I'm honest, I think it's a good report, and I think it's been broadly welcomed. So it's now a matter of how the government moves it forward.
And it's interesting, Mary Cray, that Louise Casey says part of the problem is that in the past people have been reluctant to talk about this issue for fear of being branded racist. Is that still a real problem? I
think she's right, and I think that allows the peddlers of hate on whichever side, whether that's the Islamic State people, the fanatics, or whether it's the far-right BNP racists, to move in and fill that vacuum. But I want to come back to what Simon said. I mean, because the point is, when a child starts out at school, they don't know what colour their friends and their teachers are. They just see everybody the same, and somehow these divisions grow up as we grow older. And we had a report out about international educational standards showing that the whole of the UK is falling behind, and we've got issues particularly in the north of England with education. We've had a report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation saying 1 in 5 people living in poverty is actually working. So this is about the quality of education in our towns and cities, this is about the jobs that people have, and this is also about the areas in which people can afford to live, because if people are all clustered in the areas of cheap housing, then that is predominantly, and it's always been the case, that where the poorer and the immigrant communities
social
will
mobility,
live.
basically.
It is, and social and physical mobility.
But how important is language? Because Casey found that there was a high proportion, particularly of Muslim women in Bradford, who didn't speak English. Is that acceptable?
I think it's really important that everybody speaks English. Having said that, I think what we need to move away from is that if a parent doesn't speak English, it means their children will be illiterate. My mother doesn't speak English. It was never a barrier for me. But I think if you're living in a country, if you don't speak the language, there are lots and lots of services, opportunities that are closed off to you. I see it with my mother. Her life would have been far richer if she had been able to speak English. But I think what needs to happen is that we need the funding to allow these things to happen. We can't talk about English language.
Well, should the NHS and public services pay for translation services? Should leaflets be written in other languages other than English? Is that acceptable?
Personally, I think we'll be better off putting that money into ensuring that people actually speak English. But that's a personal opinion. I think that would be a far more useful thing. I think the Casey report makes a lot of good points, and those mustn't be overlooked. The report comes from a particular place in terms of the whole prevent strategy and addressing what has been happening in communities, and it's set against a particular global climate at the moment. But it makes a lot of good points, and certainly there are women who are being marginalised and who are unable to access services that they need to access because of a lack of English.
That's a problem, no doubt, and I think it does make women uniquely vulnerable, because women who are often brought in as brides are reliant on their husbands for their immigration status, and in some cases they can be the victims of domestic violence and then not know how to access services when those crimes are committed against them or their children. So I do think it's important that women are empowered to live full and rich and active and economically empowered in their lives as well, not to be dependent on a husband. And I think, but as Simon says, all the funding for those language services has been cut from local councils, cut from FE colleges, and I think we need to make sure that women are empowered to go out and learn and have those services to go to.
Well, the Secretary of State in his statement in the House this week did say quite clearly that there is still money going in, and there will continue to be money going in for language services, and I think that's very important. But I agree, the key thing here is education, isn't it? I mean, that is, if we're talking about social mobility, it doesn't matter about what community, education is going to be absolutely crucial.
Very briefly, we're running out of time. Will cities like Bradford and other big Yorkshire cities, are they going to become more segregated or less segregated in years to come?
I think the festival that I run, which is the Bradford Literature Festival, which is for all communities, is a sign of the fact that actually we're becoming less and less segregated. And it's not about segregation, it's actually about where people can afford to live.
And it's also about people falling in love and getting married with each other. Interracial marriage is at a real high in this country.
A fascinating subject. We could talk all day. We'll come back to it some other time, but thank you all for your thoughts today. And with that, as always, we shall hand you back to Andrew Neil in London.